one.
Okay.
So, good evening, Jeff. We are live on my channel, but it's you interviewing me, right?
Well, I guess we're just having a discussion. But we're not live on my channel, but my channel is The Bitter Pill, for those of you who know. And today we're talking with Jerry Gray, who has lived in China, an Australian and originally British citizen who's been living in China for the past 18 years. And like I said, this is The Bitter Pill coming to you not live, except in China, from Brighton, Michigan currently. As you know, if you follow this channel, I'm usually in Bloomington, Indiana, but extended vacation here. But anyway, and those of you who are in China and have no idea where any of that is, Michigan is one of the northernmost states of the United States, and Indiana is right below it, somewhere in sort of east central USA. But I guess first of all, Jerry, how did you come to be in China, and did you always talk about political stuff, or did you kind of evolve into doing that as you saw how different things were in China from how they were portrayed in the West? Or
Yeah, I came to China 18 years ago, and I came here as a teacher. I was going through a period of time. I was 46 years old. My career had finished. I was a general manager of a multinational corporation, American company actually, part of United Technologies Corp, UTC, and I was there. For 17 years in Australia, and then I got made redundant, and I decided I was going to travel. And my plan was to travel to the Americas eventually, with a portable skill of being able to teaching and traveling. That was what I was planning on doing. And I got my first teaching gig for 8 months here in Zhongshan in Guangdong, which is, for anybody who doesn't know the location, if you know where Hong Kong is, it's not that far from Hong Kong. It's closer to Macau, but on the other side of the river from Hong Kong.
right.
And
So
the second part of the question was I always involved in politics? And the answer to that was not at all. I got into politics about 3 years ago.
wow. Yeah. And by the way, if you see my camera being unsteady, I apologize. I'm on my phone today because I had technical issues with my computer, so bear with us for that. So what got you started in your journey into talking about politics in China and the world, I guess?
Okay, interesting. I mean, a lot of people ask me this, but there's probably an interesting answer that I'm not really into politics. That's the truth. I don't get into. I know that you from following. You're into Marxism. I know some people are into Leninism, Stalinism, communism, all those isms. I'm not at all. I'm just an ordinary guy who has never really had much of an interest in that kind of thing. What did happen was, I about 7 or 8 years ago, I started as a kind of way to keep fit and lose some weight riding a bike. And I rode a bike across China, and that's what started it all. I rode a bike from the border of Macau to the border of Kazakhstan. Now, I don't know if anybody knows the geography of that, but people who know China will know that's a very long way. Yeah, it's a very long way. It's across the 3 major rivers. We had to cross the Pearl River in the south, the Yangtze or the Changjiang in the middle, and the Yellow River in the north. They all have Chinese names, of course. But we crossed those 3 rivers, we crossed 3 mountain ranges, and we crossed 3 deserts: the Tenggeli Desert, the Tengger Desert, and the Gobi, part of the Gobi Desert too. So having done that, I didn't really do much about that. We raised money for charity. My wife and I are involved in charities, and that was the plan, was to raise money for charity. The next thing was we got locked down in 2020, early 2020. We got locked down. And I thought, well, this is a great excuse. I've got no work. I've got nothing to do. Why don't I start using this Twitter account that I opened a few years ago and haven't used? I literally had, from 2015 to 2019, one tweet and 2 followers. One of them was my brother, and another was a friend of mine. And
so where were you locked down, Jerry?
In Zhongshan, in my home. I was
okay.
actually in this apartment where I'm sitting now. By lockdown, we had what they call a semi-lockdown. I was allowed out every second day to go shopping. My wife was not allowed out, but that was a coincidence because I was the person who went out on the day they said, you can only go out every second day from now on. Here's your pass. So they gave me a pass.
And one other question. A lot of people have this image of China that the whole country's been locked down for 3 years or something. About how much of China has actually ever locked down? Because I know a lot of cities haven't.
Well, most of China has not locked down. Most of China is not locked down. But right now is probably as bad as it's been since 2020 when Wuhan locked down. There was a citywide lockdown of Shanghai. And with those exceptions, Wuhan, the big one, and Shanghai, the next big one, almost everything else has been quite minor lockdown. We've got cases in Zhongshan right now, and the city's not locked down. Right. But there is a street in lockdown at the other side of town. It's about 15 kilometers from me. It's not a big deal. It only affects people very surgically most of the time. Yeah. Shanghai was an exception. Right now in Guangzhou, there's probably about 1 million people locked down, but there's 12 million people not locked down in Guangzhou.
Okay.
So currently, Guangzhou is going through a very, very bad period. And that's about 8,000 or 9,000 cases a day, every day in Guangzhou, but 99% of them, 99.9% of them are inside that lockdown area. So they're not letting it out. That's what they're trying to contain. Right. And so to say that the place is locked down, at any given time, there's people in lockdown pretty much everywhere you go. There's something happening. It's difficult to travel. And there's a lot of feeling that I don't know anyone who says, I want to be locked down.
Sure.
Almost everyone says, I hate this. I don't want this. I'm really pissed off. I'm really fed up. Almost every single person is fed up with it. Don't get me wrong and say, I'm painting this as rosy. No one wants this. But almost every person that I talk to is saying the same thing. They're saying, I support it. I just don't want it to happen to me. And that's it. So Robert just asked if I meant Haizhu, and yes, Haiju's got 8,000 cases today. It's a suburb of Guangzhou. Guangzhou has 13 million people, and less than 1 million are locked down, mostly in Haizhu. And they're opening places all the time. Last week, part of Panyu was locked down. A few days before, part of Huadu was locked down. Baiyun had some lockdown. And now they're open. Those places, they're locked down for 3, 4, 5 days, and then they reopen again most of the time. Haizhu is going to stay locked down for several days, maybe even weeks. Yeah, because the numbers are just so high.
Yeah. Well, I know Shanghai, did that sort of localized lockdown strategy initially, where just certain areas where they found cases were locked down, back in the spring, and then they decided that wasn't working, and wound up locking down the whole city. So I'm wondering what happened there that made it different from. What's
a different strategy was adopted. I'm not an expert on this, but I think what happened was they said, we're going to lock you down in 2 days' time. And of course, what then happened is people started to move around to do their shopping, and then everybody panicked a little bit, I think. It's much, much better organized now. There was a 20-point strategy came out of the government just a few days ago, I think end of last week. They're making it a lot easier to be locked down, as it were. It's not a nice situation. Nobody wants it, but it's becoming better. And it's now there's a lot of people upset about it. There's a lot of people unhappy about it. But generally speaking, most people approve of the policy. We just want to see the end of it. We want the exit strategy. And that exit strategy won't happen until there's a significant change. And that means Currently, more than I think 1.2 billion people are fully vaccinated.
Right.
800 million are booster shot vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's very small percentage are not vaccinated, but we know that the vaccine doesn't fully protect people. So
Right.
they're working very hard on new vaccines. Therapeutics are being worked on, but there are still people dying. One died yesterday in Beijing. A couple died last week in Beijing. And these were people who've been sick for quite some time. So people are still dying, and they're trying to avoid that by absolutely minimizing the number of people who can get sick by these surgical lockdowns. I'm planning on doing a video in the next couple of days. Probably by the end of this week, I will have a video about this new 20-point scheme, which helps. And part of it was also opening up the country. They need to open up the country. Everyone's looking for the exit strategy, but when I give these complaints about it, please don't get me wrong, almost every person that I know wants the exit strategy, but understands the reason why we don't have it. And most of the people I argue with are foreigners most of the time, not Chinese people. Chinese people accept it. The foreigners say, can't have this. So that's the problem.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so who are you to tell Chinese people what they can do? But of course, they think that everything is on high.
One of my regular followers has just said that there's been 29,000 deaths in China so far, and one in Beijing today. I hadn't realized it was that many. The whole country.
Well, he's probably including Taiwan and Hong Kong, which, of course, have a different government and a different strategy.
Yes, that would include those numbers. Yeah, that's true. And as he says, Hang is really smart guy. I think it's a guy. He said the country could not have achieved 3.9% GDP growth had they locked the country down. Now, a lot of people are critical of China's growth because it's slowed. It's still called growth. We don't call it negative growth in China. You call that a loss. But Americans are showing negative growth in a lot of places. A lot of your states are having negative growth, and you haven't had the lockdown, and you have the freedoms. You're still showing the negative growth. You've got literally a recession happening in America right now with, I think, 3/4 or definitely 2/4 of negative growth, which is a great way of describing losses. China is still growing, but the growth has slowed, and that's a fact, but it's still growing.
It's still... I mean, it's been by far the fastest growing country in the world for 40 plus years. And, even during the pandemic, it remains.
If we go back 40 years ago, when China had a GDP of a couple of $100 billion and they grew by 40% or 20% in a year, that's a significant growth. But when you grow by 3% on 20 trillion, then you're showing some considerable growth, albeit that the percentage has slowed down. It's still significant growth. There's a lot of good things going on in China right now. There's some problems. Don't get me wrong. There's some problems as well. Particularly small businesses, hospitality business, tourism really are screwed. They're really bad. But the government does need to do something, and will, I'm sure.
Yeah. But just to put things in perspective for people who don't know about one or the other country or both and how they fared with COVID, here in the United States, we have had 1.1 million or over 1.1 million deaths that we know of due to COVID, and several million people ill enough to be hospitalized, several million more people, 2 to 4 million at any given point in time, who are disabled by long COVID and can't work. Several million more than that who've had long-term symptoms related to having had COVID. So it's been a massive problem here. And of course, as you said, it hasn't helped the economy at all. In fact, it's hurt it a great deal for that many people to be getting sick. And yet they persist with this, let her rip strategy. And this Centers for Disease Control here has now taken to deliberately and studiously avoiding any mention of the idea that it would be a good idea for people to wear masks. I mean, they literally say, if you think you're sick, cover your mouth when you cough. And they don't even talk about masks anymore.
Okay.
Just
Yeah,
shocking.
the covering your mouth when you cough, but then of course you're going to touch something, particularly on public transport, and this is why the washing hands is important. There's a lot of people saying masks don't work. There's a lot of people saying you're wasting your time, but I'll tell you, the way that China is handling it is a lot better than the way it's being handled in some other countries. That's all I would want to say on that matter. And I'm grateful that I'm in China, and I'm grateful. I mean, it cost me 100 RMB, $15 to get the vaccination.
Yeah.
I paid for three of them, and it was 100 RMB each, $15 each. My wife was free. The rest of her family were all free. Any treatment for COVID is all free. When you do get locked down, you get deliveries of food for free. Now, I've got a freezer full of food in case I get locked down. I've got rice, I've got flour, I've got frozen meats and things, which we don't normally buy a lot of in China, but I'm buying it now because I don't want to be short of things. But
Right.
if we do get locked down, food deliveries are coming. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of volunteers are getting out there. One of the great things about volunteering is when you volunteer, you get out of your apartment. So people are volunteering. So there's more volunteers than there are people in lockdown sometimes.
Yeah.
They're taking
It's
nearly all done by volunteers.
Yeah. It's I mean, things are people are very civic minded in China, and we can get into that. But just to finish, the perspective, the comparison between China and the U.S. The flip side of that is that in China, due to their taking COVID seriously, in mainland China, at least, there have only been something like 5,500 deaths from COVID in a country of 1.4 billion people, and something like 1 million cases that we know of. And China tests far more extensively than the United States in a country of 1.4 billion. So those people who I see all the time on Twitter who say, you're going to get COVID, there's no way you can avoid it. Well, look at China. Almost everybody in China has avoided getting COVID because they take it seriously there, and they have a very comprehensive strategy where it's not just one thing. Obviously you can't rely on vaccines to prevent COVID by itself. Countries with 90% vaccination rate that don't do anything else have outbreaks much more severe than China ever has. But put them all together in a comprehensive, well thought out, scientifically based strategy, and hardly anybody needs to get COVID.
Well, there's another aspect to what you're saying, and you're absolutely right. I'm 100% behind you. The quantum alchemist is saying masks work. I'm inclined to agree with that. They've got to be better than no masks, if we put it that way. So how they work, whether they work. And my brother's in the medical industry, and he told me masks don't work if they're not used properly. Okay, let's try and use them properly. Now, the other perspective that I wanted to mention was that people quite often say to me on Twitter or other social media, they say, but China lies about its statistics. China doesn't tell the truth. Okay. I get that they think China lies. It's actually not true, but let's say China did lie about it. Okay, I've lived in China 18 years. All throughout the pandemic, I've been here. I have got, through my wife, hundreds of family members. Extended families are always extended in China. We've got hundreds of family members. We've got thousands of friends. I've worked in schools with thousands of students, and I don't know a single person who's had COVID. Nor do I know anyone who knows anyone who's had COVID. Now, bear in mind that only 1% or less of people who catch COVID die of it. And when I can say that I've lived in the Greater Bay Area, there's 113 million people living in the Greater Bay Area. I've traveled extensively around it. I've been in Shenzhen, Foshan, Dongguan. I've been in Zhuhai. I've been in Guangzhou. I've been in, these are just cities around me. And I don't know anyone who had COVID. So if I don't know anyone who had COVID, and I don't know anyone who knows anyone who had COVID, the chances of the deaths being any more than the numbers that they're saying are extremely remote. I was in Jiangsu a little while ago. I was in Chongqing a little while ago. I was in Beijing a little while ago. I've literally traveled to, I think, 40 different cities in the last 4 months, and I've still never met anybody who knows anybody who's had COVID.
Well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Just for contrast, in my family, we don't have a very big family, but on my side of the family, um, my sister and her husband have had COVID. My son's had COVID. My mom had COVID. Fortunately, she didn't have it too bad, but it was bad
Mhm.
enough that her breathing was impaired long term. She had to be on oxygen the rest of her life. She died about a year and a half later from Alzheimer's.
All right. Okay.
Um, you know, let's see who else. My brother hasn't had COVID. I haven't had COVID. Um, uh, Both of my sister's kids have had COVID. Um, on
So pretty much everyone you know has had it or knows someone who's had it. It's the
Yeah,
opposite to me. Yeah.
yeah. On my
Yeah.
partner's side, she's had three uncles who've died from it. Her son's mother-in-law and aunt-in-law both had it pretty bad. Um, uh, uh, Her daughter's fiance had it moderately bad, and some of these people were careful, but it's hard, and some weren't. But
Mhm.
it's hard to. I consider myself lucky being able to work from home.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough for people to avoid it if your country as a whole doesn't take it seriously. So. Uh,
I have a friend who left China in June, last day, 29th of June, left China on the 2nd of July, sent me a message from America saying, me, my mum and dad have all got COVID. He'd
yeah.
been out of China 3 full days.
Wow.
That's how it is out there.
So,
So, in fairness, all 3 of them recovered quite quickly, and there was no big deal about it. It was no more inconvenient than the common cold. So, yeah, Hung is saying that he's had 2 clients died from the vaccine. China doesn't use the mRNA vaccine. It uses the mRNA. It uses the vaccine which uses the dead cells or the dead virus, and maybe it's not as effective, but maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not a virologist, epidemiologist. I'm not going to get into that. The only thing I can say is I don't like it, but I do approve of the system. I do approve of what they're doing, but nobody likes it. So it'd be nice if it stops. If we could see an exit strategy, would be fantastic. But there won't be an exit strategy until it's a clear exit strategy. China's not going to do what Australia did, which opened up completely and now is recommending masks again, and people are dying again. So Australia has gone the opposite way, went up, down, because they keep imposing restrictions and then releasing the restrictions. And now I think they're just going to let it rip. They have no choice, because if they impose restrictions again, then the whole country is going to revolt. But that's the beauty of China. Most people are communally focused, and they won't have a problem with doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do for their community.
Yeah, and maybe this would be a good point to get into that. Actually, my colleague Bob Sinclair and I'm a social psychologist, and we've done some research looking at the relationship between cultural collectivism versus individualism, and COVID policy and individual behavior. And of course, there are exceptions to the rule. So Brazil's collectivist, meaning group-oriented, community-oriented, but they've had it bad with COVID because of their terrible leadership. Bolsonaro, until recently, was their president, and he's anti-vax and anti-mask, and doesn't care about preventing it at all. But in general, what we found was that there was a big difference in mask wearing and infection rates and death rates, and when countries locked down, earlier is much better than later for obvious reasons, and how long they stayed locked down, and other policies they pursued. So yeah, just having the cultural mindset of we're in this together, and we need to help each other and protect each other. it makes a huge difference, and that's part of the reason why China's done so well.
Those cultural dimensions that you just touched on there are vitally important. They're a huge amount of what makes China different, certainly what makes China different to America, the individualism of America and the collectivism of China. This is actually a topic I do know a bit about. I studied at a master's level, workplace psychology, cross-change management, cultural cross-change management. So it's exactly my topic. When you start saying that, I go, yeah, you're spot on with that. You're right.
Yeah. One thing that some people have been saying in light of these recent changes, I saw an article about it on World Socialist website, which I don't always agree with them, but I follow them because they do a lot of good news reporting. But they claim that these recent, the 20-point program constituted an abandonment of dynamic zero COVID. And I don't see it that way at all. And I'm wondering what your take is on it.
No, China is not going to abandon zero COVID until there's an exit strategy that allows them to do so safely. Simple as that. That might be the vaccine improvements. It might be therapeutic improvements. It might be the less virulent strain of the disease. Whatever it is, they're not going to abandon COVID zero until such time as one of the factors that is required to allow it to be abandoned safely, at least one of the factors, is in place. They're listening to the science. The science is saying if 1% of people who catch COVID die, you're going to lose 13 million people. 13 million people is just an unacceptable figure. 1 million people is an unacceptable figure, but it's been allowed in one country. And really, if it was literally allowed, let's clear out some of the old rubbish, was the way it seemed across here. Everyone in China is looking at America and going, what? They allowed this to go through their vulnerable societies? And it is the vulnerable societies who are suffering the most. But who pays? What do the vulnerable societies offer to society? They're a drain. They're a cost on society. So in a capitalist organization like America is, and it's not a country, it's an organization, 50 organizations, they're going to just say, well, what's the cost benefit analysis to this? Oh, look, we're going to lose all these people who are on welfare.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like from here.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Like, oh, gee, we won't have to dole out as much money for Social Security if we can kill off some old people. Ironically, the recent midterm elections here for Congress and state and local and so forth were pretty close when it had been expected. It would be a blowout for the Republicans, because that's pretty typical that the party that is not the incumbent president's party does well in midterms. But it didn't turn out that way, and some people speculate that that's because so many more of Republicans or Donald Trump supporters or what have you didn't take COVID seriously, thought that it was a hoax or that it wasn't so bad, or masks didn't work or vaccines didn't work and so forth. And so a lot more of them have died than people who don't share that political orientation. I forget where I was going with this.
No, we talked about the social welfare thing. Maybe we should move on from that. There's a couple of comments coming in. It was either that or gross negligence. Not sure, but it certainly wasn't. Wasn't good management.
Yeah, but I mean, I take it's hard to overstate the impact of culture on this. You talk to Americans or people from the West generally. And they're like, oh, I had COVID and it was no big deal. It was just like a cold. And I'm like, well, did you give it to anybody else? Maybe they didn't have such a good time of it. That's
the other aspect. You talk about the culture of communal societies. Most families live in apartments in China rather than houses. And most families live with grandparents rather than farm them off into aged care shelters or whatever. So you've got children going to kindergarten or primary school, coming home with COVID and giving it to grandma or granddad, and then you've got a huge problem. Now, that problem is a lot less. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in Western countries, but it's a lot less of a problem. My father is 90 years old. He lives alone and has visitors come to him all the time, but he doesn't have kids coming from school to live in his house with him. So that's the big factor in the West. You can actually minimize it with proper steps. You can't eliminate COVID from the society, but you can minimize it. And that's exactly what China is trying to do. It can't let COVID loose in a society that has so many vulnerable people living within the society.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Such dense populated conditions as well. I mean, that's part of what happened.
I live in an area that's about the size of England, and 113 million other people live with me.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I mean, I don't know how big your states are, but I can assure you the state that you're in now is bigger than the Greater Bay Area, where we have 9 cities and a population of close to 120 million.
Yeah. Yeah, the entire state of Indiana, where I live, is only 6 million, and I'm sure it's larger geographically.
So there's part of the reason why COVID Dynamic Zero is so important, and it will be continued. It won't be released until there is an exit strategy that has no harm, not even minimal harm, but no harm to the society.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say it's okay if 1 million people die. When currently they're looking at modeling of 13 million deaths. And if they bring it down and say, well, we've got the modeling down to 6 million deaths, that's not acceptable. Or bring it down to 1 million deaths, it's still not acceptable. That's when it's COVID zero, or COVID is not harming the society. That's when it'll be allowed. That's when we'll have an open society here again.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Well, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about COVID, which is a topic is pretty important to both of us. But I wanted to move on to some other things here, and just generally focus on the contrast between kind of the mythology about China, or the claims about China in the West, and what the reality is based on what you've experienced, or what we've both read about. I guess I can just kind of go down the list here. Common Western notions about China. That's this authoritarian hellhole where Xi Jinping is a dictator, and everything that happens in China is because of him, and no dissent is allowed. And at the CPC Congress last month, the former president, Hu Jintao, was purged from the party on national TV during the Congress. A popular myth on the Western left, or belief, if you will, is that China is capitalist, full stop. That even some people say it's imperialist. There's the claims about supposed cultural genocide or even physical genocide in Xinjiang and Tibet. The pro-democracy movement, it's characterized as, in Hong Kong, was squashed by the authoritarian Chinese state. There's the claims that COVID came from a lab leak, and therefore, quote unquote, the pandemic is all China's fault. So, I mean,
let me go down the list for you.
Okay.
No. How many did you say?
Let's see. I think we've got like 6 here. Yeah.
Every single thing that you've just listed there is not correct.
Yeah.
Simple as that. As that. How do you? I mean, Xi Jinping is a leader for a third term. Well, Margaret Thatcher was a leader for a third term. Even one of your presidents, I think it was Roosevelt, was a leader for 4 terms. Most countries that are democracies don't have term limits. America does. And UK doesn't, Australia doesn't, Canada doesn't, New Zealand doesn't. There's a couple of African countries that do, but I mean, there's not many countries in the world have term limits, so why should China be any different? And he's not president for life. What he did was there's a democracy going on in China that is completely unrealized by people who say democracy means one person, one vote. The fact that you can vote for a president means diddly squat to anybody in the world. Your president can do nothing. He is completely hamstrung by having a Congress, which has a Senate and a House, who don't do what he wants to do. Build back better. Where is that? It hasn't been signed off. Nothing has happened to it. Build back better just fell into a hole. Just about everything that he wants to do, can't do. Now, does President Biden want to improve relations with China? Certainly, he said he did. Certainly, it looked like he did. He's gone back to an American population that are hostile to that idea, so he won't do it and it's not the people who want him to do it. It's not the people who do or don't want him. He can't do it because the power brokers won't allow it. The people who really make the donations to your party. Now, what can happen in China? You can get factions. You can get things that are voted in and not voted in. You get all these things going on. But how do those people get there? They're voted to get there. When you get promoted, it's promoted on merit. It's not promoted on I mean, you don't become president by being a successful TV star. Simple as that. You become president by being a successful provincial manager and then moving into the central government. You become president by starting your life at the grassroots and working your way through the systems on a series of votes, a series of promotions. You are elected and selected to get to the next job. That's how it works. And Xi Jinping has been voted into his position. It works. It works for China. Why do Americans want to change that? It's such a silly thing. So many American people say, but they don't have democracy. Well, yes, they do. It's just not your democracy. It's different. In fact, it's probably a lot better. Now, is it perfect? I don't think so. But it's not bad. And 1.4 billion people, 95% approve of what the central government is doing.
This was an anonymous poll by an American polling firm from Harvard.
Three American polling. Harvard Ash was one, University of California, and also UCLA did it. And also there was a Canadian, I can't remember which one it was, but there was a Canadian university did it too. And they've all come up with over 90%. Over 90% satisfaction rate. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's 100% satisfied in China because they're dissatisfied locally. They have some local dissatisfactions. And so it was a little lower when it comes down to local. But you know what people do when they're dissatisfied locally? They go into their local community office, bang on the table, and get things fixed. That's how it's done. Now,
let's talk about the grassroots aspect of this, because that's the aspect of democracy that we Westerners can relate to the most. Now, I don't know that much about the Chinese electoral system, but I know that there are local elections where, it's pretty open who can run. Unlike here, where whoever's got the most money typically wins, some few candidates have a lot of money and everybody else gets pretty much shut out of the system. I know because I tried to run as a Green Party candidate here a number of years ago, and I got something like 2% of the vote because I didn't have any money. But
nobody knew who you were. The thing about being a representative here in China is that you don't get there based on what you promise you're going to do. You get there because people know you in the community. They've seen what you do. They watch what you do. They work with you. They are your employers and your employees and your peers. They are your neighbors. These are the people who vote for you. This person works hard in the community. I think they should represent us when we need to send someone up to Beijing. That's how it happens. And it really is not about promises. And if you can get to Beijing, you can get there on the first vote. And if you do nothing and you don't improve their lives, you're out the next time. It's about what you do not what you say you will do. It's about what you have done. Local elections are really interesting here because they do happen quite often. And my wife can vote, but she has to go to another city to do so, so she doesn't bother. In Australia, you have a voting mandate. When there's an election, you must vote. There's a requirement to vote, and then you can get a fine if you don't. In America, you just have a choice, and probably 50%, 40% don't bother voting. So then what form of democracy is that? In China, you do have a vote. And here's what happens. When you turn up at the voting polling station, they give you 20 RMB for your trouble. 20 RMB is like $3. But it paid for your bus fare, or it paid for the time that the meal on the way home. It's everyone gets it. So you don't donate to your government; they donate back to you when you go. So it encourages people to come and vote because 20 RMB is not very much. It's not very much money at all, but it's been going on for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, and in contrast to that, here, they traditionally have elections on a Tuesday, during the work week. So obviously that limits participation quite a bit there. And
don't you get time off? Don't you have paid time to go and vote?
No.
Right.
This is America we're talking about. We do have you mail in or absentee voting possible, and a lot of people do that, but particularly the Republicans are trying to put restrictions on that because they realize that even though the Democrats also suck, most people perceive them as even worse. So if they don't limit participation somehow, throw people off of voter registration lists, if they change addresses a lot is a popular one, which discriminates against poor and minority people here. They realize that if they don't do those things to try and limit participation, they'll lose.
That's really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, China doesn't encourage. It goes on in the background. It's just happening all the time. The Chinese try to call it democracy. They call it whole process democracy. And okay, I accept that's their name for it, but I prefer to call it collaborative government. They really do collaborate. When they want to do something, they make sure that the people understand what is being done, why it's being done, the purpose for it. And I was in Hunan recently, and in rural Hunan. And I was with a TV crew, and as a guest, just as an observer, and I wasn't really part of this, but they took me to this site where they're going to build a dam, and an entire village was going to be flooded. The people in the village had their property paid for. They had a new unit, an apartment given to them, and they had the value of their crops for the next 70 years granted to them. Wow. So if you're growing rice on this piece of land, you got your land bought from you, you got your house bought from you, which they own, you got a new apartment to go and live in the town center, and some people didn't want that, so they built more apartments up the hill, safer place, so those locals can still stay in that local area, and they guaranteed the income of that farm. And I don't know if it was index linked to CPI, I'm not sure, but they guaranteed the income of that farm for the life of the dam, which was supposed to be 70 years. So who can complain about that? I wish they'd come and knock my apartment down. It would be fantastic. That kind of thing goes on all the time. But it still took 4 years for that to be approved.
That sounds so capitalist, Jerry.
No, but it took 4 years for that to be approved. And the reason it took 4 years, because one person, one social media influencer was saying that it's going to destroy the habitat of a certain bird that lived in the area. People from Beijing flew down to see him, to talk him out of this problem. And it was a genuine problem. This particular bird is going to be dehabitated, if that's the right word. And he was concerned about the nature and that sort of thing, which is a fair concern. But then they explained to him, do you know that 30 people died last year because of floods? No, I didn't. Did you know, were you aware that for 2 years back in the 1980s and the 90s, there was no crops grown there because there was drought? He said, yeah, I knew about that. I lived through it. Okay, so that was because there wasn't enough water. Now we're going to build a reservoir so that can never happen again. We're going to build a dam so the flood downriver can't happen again. Once he started to realize that, he said, yeah, okay, well, that makes sense. So this poor bird is now dehabitated and the dam is going ahead. I was invited for the kind of groundbreaking ceremony of the dam because I think they wanted some foreign faces there. It was nice. I had a nice trip to the countryside.
Yeah, I mean, so often with just like that, there are trade-offs.
Yeah. I mean, but it kind of destroys the image of this authoritarian country. Now, I mean, let's go back to that authoritarian thing. How many people have the police killed this year so far? Do you know?
I'm sure it's more than 1,000 in the United States.
On average for the last 4 years, it's been 3 a day. It's been 1,000 a year, and you're getting close to the end of the year, so you're probably about right. The last time the police in China shot anyone, 2018.
Yeah. Did they kill anyone, or they just?
Honestly, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I know the story. I know what happened, but I don't know the end result of it. But it was a person who was driving a forklift truck. It happened twice. In 2 years, it happened twice. 2017, 2018. One was a car, one was a forklift truck, into a crowd of people with a view to hurting as many people as he could, and would have killed people had he not been shot. And it happened twice, 2017, 2018. And since that, as far as I can ascertain, I can't find an event where a police officer shot anyone in China.
Yeah, not in the 20.
So what does that tell you about the authoritarianism of these people?
Yeah, it doesn't sound much like a police state to me. And I know you've talked about this, that there's a lot friendlier relationship between the police and the community in China than there is, for example, here, because it is not the police state that people here in the West depict it as.
I mean, the police are quite official. They do their job pretty well. But no one's afraid of them. If the police knock on my door, I'd say, oh, what's going on? I wouldn't be afraid of what they're there for. People say, well, if the police knock on your door in the night, I'd be saying, is there a fire risk or something? They're not knocking. If they want to see me, they know where I live. They have my phone number. They can just make a call and say, can you pop into the police station? And I would. I don't have any fear of the police here at all. And I don't know, maybe your followers wouldn't know this. I was a police officer for 10 years in the UK. And as a result of that period of time, I really got to know how policing works. And I've seen both sides of it. Community policing is great. I worked in a small town in Essex for a little while, place called Billericay, if people ever know that, and very community policing style. And I worked on the Brixton riots and the Toxteth riots and the miners' strike and all of those things from around the late 70s, early 80s, which made news in their day. I was there, and I was fighting on the front lines with coal miners and the restless youth of South London. So, yeah, I know exactly how police work because I was one. And I'm seeing here exactly the way I thought police should work before I joined them. When you have this image, I want to be a policeman because it's a good, friendly job helping people. That's what they are. That's who they are here. And the People's Liberation Army are loved. The army are absolutely loved. They don't attack anyone. All they do is help people. There's, the military. If you want to go into the army, you can't have a criminal record. You can't have a tattoo. You must have finished high school. You can't be a dropout from society. You can't have any sort of stain on your background. If you want to get into the People's Liberation Army, you must be a very good character. And isn't that what your military ought to be?
Yeah, you would think here that they have a lot of trouble recruiting people, so they don't take about anybody.
So someone's made the comment here. Most police don't carry guns. That's true in China. Yeah. And another one says Jerry has met the royal family. which is also true. I worked with Prince Charles, Princess Diana, the Queen. The Queen actually once thought I was her son. Now there'll be a couple. We got 28 viewers at the moment. Thank you very much, all 28 of you. But there will be a couple of those viewers that go, he does look a bit like Prince Andrew right now. I do.
That's funny.
Andrew, why are you wearing that uniform? I'm not your son, Mom. True story. True story.
But I mean, as far as the China has not been involved in any military conflict in over 40 years, whereas the U.S., like I don't think there's been a year in my lifetime, and I'm 61 years old, when the U.S. military hasn't been involved in some conflict somewhere.
Yeah. Did you say 4 years there, Jeff? 4 years?
What's
40.
that?
Did you say 4 years or 40 years that
40,
since China?
Over 40 years.
I thought you said 4 years and knew something I didn't know about. But yeah, maybe I missed the news. But yeah, it was. They did invade Vietnam in 1979, and it was quite a bloody war. It was very harsh. The Vietnamese will say that they won, and the Chinese will say we won. The point is that it's history, and everybody has moved on, and they're friends again now. I don't know the full details of it, but I do know it was basically in support of Cambodia, and probably wasn't a very good reason for invading anyone. But yeah, it lasted 3 weeks or 27 days, I think, 4 weeks. And that was the end of the matter as far as the actual conflict goes. I mean, there was obviously diplomatic issues evolving from it. But yeah, there's been no... The Chinese military are prepared, very prepared for defense. They're very good at helping the people when there's a national disaster or any form of local disaster. When the earthquake happened, wow, thousands of military people. When the floods happened last year, thousands of military people sent to the area. They just get heaped praise from the people. They are the People's Liberation Army for a reason. The people love them. They are from the people, and they are very much of the people, and they're always helping. You can't even, you can see them. There's very few of them around. I don't see them on a daily basis, but you see them if you're traveling across China in the trains, and they're always helping somebody. They're always picking up somebody's bag or pushchair and helping them around. And this is not just things you see on Twitter or Douyin or any of these. You actually really see this in the streets, in the public. If they're in military uniform, they are required, I think, but they just do it anyway. They're really nice people. My wife's cousin married a military man. What a lovely guy. I mean, you wouldn't know this guy was a soldier. He doesn't give you any of those airs and graces, or he's not a tough guy or anything like that. A real gentleman, and a great father. He's got 2 young kids now.
Yeah,
well, that's the way they are. That's the way soldiers should be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure, at least, the people I've known here that have been in the military have generally been very nice people. But, I suspect most people in the military are. But, I mean, when you get trained to dehumanize whoever the other is of the day, and, you get into that, I'm following orders thing where you can always use that as an excuse for anything to do. Then that leads to very bad behavior in conflicts.
Yeah. Well, Tommy Putra has just made another great comment. The people in China attack the military with food and water when they're returning. As they're trying to leave, they're going home from having built a temporary dam, built a temporary bridge, helped the people escape from whatever disaster that they were. They get swamped with people throwing food at them and gifts. It is a fact. I mean, it's funny to see this, and they're all trying to throw it back. They're not allowed to take it. So, but it's part of the culture of China now. I mean, I'm trying to think back to that list of things that you said. The authoritarian was one. The dictator for life was
maybe
another.
Since we're talking about the military and the police, we could go back to the one time, and I know you weren't in China at the time, but you've certainly talked to a lot of people about it and read a lot about it, and that's Tiananmen Square conflict, where there were civilian deaths at the hands of the military and police, and deaths in the other
Are you
direction as
sure
well.
about that, Jeff? Where did you get your information from?
Well, I mean, it's in the West. It's described as a Tiananmen Square massacre, which actually reporters who were there on the square at the time say that nothing really happened in the square itself, except for the infamous tank man incident where he wasn't hurt at all, even though he was climbing up on the tank and stuff.
Yeah.
There was
you've got a West. You have a Western perspective, and let me put something into perspective here for you.
It's not my perspective that there was a massacre at all.
It's a Western perspective, and I had the same perspective too. And a few years ago, I looked a little bit deeper into it, and I found that it didn't all marry up. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I mean, that would be ridiculous. The British ambassador sent out a cable that said on the nights, one of the nights of the event, he sent out a cable saying, I think at least 10,000 people will be dead. And the next morning he revised that and said it's nowhere near that number. It's probably less than 2,000. This is a matter of historical record, but the number 10,000 still floats around, and this is why they call it a massacre. Now, here's one thing that everyone can agree on. If you lose your son or daughter to a situation like this, you're not going to let it drop. It doesn't matter how authoritarian, you just lost your child. You're not going to let it drop.
Yeah.
There is an organization, or there was an organization called the Mothers of Tiananmen, and it has 200 members. It has 200 members. Now, why do the Mothers of Tiananmen have only 200 members? To me, that indicates 200 people died. Now, what I do know for a fact, and this is from reading the Western media on it, is reading from the people who were in the square. There was no massacre in Tiananmen Square. End of story. So that part of it is wrong. There were people killed around the square, near the square, but nothing inside the square. There are even not BBC, Wall Street Journal. There's a couple of big named journalists who were in the square all night, and they left a peaceful square in the morning, having heard gunshots and things going on. Yeah. Now, that much we know. We know that people died. There's no argument about that. But one of the things that's not well known is that almost everyone who died was military or police. That's a fact. And that's what China's been saying all along. This was not some organic movement about more democracy, more freedom, better rights. This was an attempt at a color revolution. Yeah. Why was Nancy Pelosi in Beijing that day? Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and she wasn't alone. There were 3 senators at the time, and she was a senator at the time, or congresswoman. I don't know what she is.
And George Soros, or certainly his organization.
George Soros was very actively involved in this and funding something. What was he funding, for Christ's sake? What's a Hungarian-born Jewish American businessman funding in China? That's not about human rights. Yeah. That's about color change, regime changes. There's much more to this story. Now, I don't know the full story. I wasn't there. I was a kid. No, I wasn't quite a kid, but I was reading the same reports you were reading about it. We're roughly the same age. We saw terrible things happening in China, and I can only tell you that a terrible event happened that night. Terrible, because about 200 people died. That's a terrible event.
Yeah.
But you have that in your country. Now, this is not about whataboutism. This is a simple fact. You have that in your country every month. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about one single event, but you have 200 people die as a result of some kind of civil disorder, civil disobedience, police action. Mm-hmm. You have that every month. You also have a murder rate that's 70 times higher in some of your cities than Beijing. Really, let's get some perspective into this. If the best that your detractors can give you is something that happened 40 years ago and is very, very grossly disputed by many different people, including people who were there, it's disputed. Now, if that's the best they've got as a fact against China, then it's not a very good argument. come back to me with something more contemporary, please.
Yeah.
What did China do last year where they killed millions of people, according to your detractors? I mean, really, all we've got to do is we've got to put it into some perspective. Let's go back to Kent State massacre. Kent State did worse. They shot at people who were running away.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a fact. So let's not say that anybody's innocent. Things went wrong. Lessons were obviously learned, because the lessons that were learned in Tiananmen were carried across to Hong Kong just recently. What did Hong Kong do? Not a single person was killed in Hong Kong.
Yeah, except for killed by the protesters, a couple of people.
Correct. I added by the police a little later. Yeah. So what does that tell you? I watched that Hong Kong situation. I watched those riots, and all I could see, having been on the front line in a riot myself as a young man, all I could see was restraint and discipline. The police were very well trained, very restrained, very disciplined, and that, as far as I'm concerned, they did an incredibly good job. And they, what everybody expected was that tanks would roll across this new bridge and you'd have the PLA. The PLA stayed in their barracks. The PLA are there. They're allowed to be there. It's part of the agreement that China will protect the region. That's part of the agreement. Everything that China has done has been within the agreement that was set up. The joint declaration way back when Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping started talking about this, they made a joint direct declaration, and everything China has done is within that joint declaration. Everything that Britain and America says they're doing is because they either, I'm going to be polite and say they don't understand. They understand fully what the joint declaration was. They understand fully what the situation is. They just want you, the consumer of their media, to understand it differently.
Exactly. Just back on the Tiananmen Square, and you could make the same comparison to a lot of other conflicts of that sort, like Maidan in Ukraine in 2014 and so forth, where there may well have been legitimate grievances. I know that there was a lot of labor unrest in China at the time because there was a lot of foreign investment, foreign corporations coming in, and they certainly were exploiting workers. So that was part of what the legitimate grievance of some of the protesters at Tiananmen Square was. But what the U.S. and other Western powers do is that they capitalize on things like that, like they're doing in Iran right now, like they did in Maidan in 2014, like they did with the Soviet Union back in the day.
And Hong Kong in 2019.
Yeah. And Hong Kong in 2019, they are trying to, let's be honest. They would like to overthrow China's government. They wanted to in Tiananmen Square in 1989. That's what that was all about as far as the West's involvement in it. That's what they did in Ukraine in 2014. That's what they did in Russia in 1996. They made sure that Boris Yeltsin got reelected, even though he was wrecking Russia on behalf of oligarchs, both domestic and foreign. They made sure he got reelected. The National Endowment for Democracy was very involved in fomenting unrest in Russia until the Russian government finally put a stop to it. Of course, they're still doing it, and they did it in Hong Kong, of course.
They're not in Hong Kong now.
Yeah.
And that was another thing. This national security law that was written into the basic agreement that Hong Kong must have a law to protect its security. Now, there are two different things. There's the regional security, and then there's the national security. Hong Kong is part of China, and therefore is part of the national security issue. But Hong Kong as a region has its own regional issues. So that's why it has its Hong Kong police force separate to the mainland police. But the fact is, and there is no disputing this, Hong Kong was, and always will be part of China. It's geographically, it's historically, for a short period of time. Politically, it wasn't. Same with Taiwan. It is, was, and always will be part of China. Now, it's only because some people try to change that we've got ourselves a situation. Now, those people who want to change it, they're not Hong Kongers. Some of them are. I mean, any Hong Konger with a grievance is sought out and manipulated into making this grievance something to do with the Communist Party of China. Now, let's be honest. The only grievances they had while they were a British colony, the British Army came in and shot them. And there's several recorded incidents of this. And there's one regiment that even got a bloody medal for doing it. And it got a royal warrant, this regiment, because they subdued the Hong Kong riots back in 1957. There was another one in 67. There were several incidents where the British Army did what they did in Northern Ireland as well. They went in there with guns, shot people. Now, how come that's not being brought up on the 4th of June every year? How come that doesn't?
It's like, okay,
it's crazy.
China's a dictatorship. Well, Hong Kong was a dictatorship of a foreign power for
of the worst kind. Of the worst kind. So, these people who wave the British flag around and cry in front of the Queen's portrait, what the hell are you thinking? Who told you that this was good? They're British teachers. Now they've been accused. I wrote an article a while ago. Hong Kong has been accused of rewriting its own history. No, it's correcting its history. It's pointing out that it was stolen from China for a period of time. It's pointing out that this part of China was managed by another country. Now, imagine that. Imagine if Manhattan Island was suddenly taken away from New York and managed by another country. Wow, what would America want to do with that? That's exactly what has been done to Hong Kong. Exactly. Yeah. Imagine if the Chinese government started sending money to I know there are Hawaiian separatists. There are Hawaiian separatists who want to bring back their monarchy and remove themselves from the United States. Now, imagine if China went there and said, we can help you with this. How much money do you need? Here are some weapons. What would America do then? And that's exactly what they're doing to Hong Kong. Exactly. I mean, it's not even a whataboutism. It's not even a comparison. It's a fact. This is what they're doing. They are undermining China's rights to its own property, its own land, and, much as some people disagree with it, its own people. But it's given them its own autonomy, and it hasn't taken away that autonomy. You can still use Facebook. You can still watch your whatever it is that you want to watch in Hong Kong without a VPN. You've still got that freedom. You can still write. The Hong Kong Free Press are still writing very negative things about China. As long as they're within the law, they're not doing hate speech, they're not doing secession, they're not doing extremism or terrorism. They're within the law. They can write whatever they want to write. They have that autonomy. They still have it. Yeah. The rights and freedoms of Hong Kong haven't been taken away at all. What has happened is the people who are trying to change the rights and freedoms of Hong Kong have been removed, and they're angry about it. They're sitting outside of Hong Kong saying, why won't they let us back in? Why, Hong Kong as I knew it is dead. Yeah, thank God Hong Kong that you knew is dead. And that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, and, as far as freedom of the press and social media and so forth in mainland China proper. I mean, yes, it's true that there are certain Western sources, outlets that you can't access unless you have a VPN. But shoe on the other foot, I can't find RT on YouTube. There's people I know.
There's a difference. There is a difference between what you're suggesting there, Jeff. When you say I can't get RT, your government has decided that RT is misinformation. I don't know if it is or it isn't. Your government has decided for you that RT is misinformation, so therefore you can't watch it unless you have a VPN. Yeah. Now that's one aspect. Your government has decided what you are allowed to see. What happens in China is slightly different. The government controls what you can see. There's no doubt about that. But what they say to you is, you can watch anything you want. Anything you want is okay, as long as it doesn't break the law. So what breaks the law in China? Pornography breaks the law in China. Now, you can say, well, it's my right to watch pornography. Okay, so go buy a VPN. Secessionism breaks the law in China. Right. You can say, what about my rights to free speech? No, not with a population of 1.4 billion people, most of whom do not want your kind of free speech. It doesn't work in a communal society. So it's against the law and we're going to take it off. terrorism, extremism, aggression, violence, and even ridicule. People keep saying that Winnie the Pooh is banned in China. Winnie the Pooh's not banned in China at all. You see kids all the time with Winnie the Pooh pajamas, and there's a Winnie Pooh ride in Winnie the Pooh ride in Shanghai. So Winnie the Pooh is not banned in China. What is banned in China is comparing Winnie the Pooh to a respected leader. When you do that, you are breaking the law. Now, you can ridicule Joe Biden all you like. You can ridicule Donald Trump all you like, and people enjoy doing that. But it's not the same kind of respectful, patriarchal, Confucius society that they have out there. And if they allow these things, these standards to slip, we're going to have an open forum the same way as America does. And to be quite honest, 90% of China doesn't want that. 90% of China don't want and don't need a VPN. All the students that I've ever taught have a VPN. And I say to them sometimes, I mean, they come to my house sometimes. We have drinks together. Now, I'm not a teacher anymore. I'm retired from that. But I still meet up with some of my old students. We'll come and have drinks. And they say, oh, I saw you on YouTube. Oh, really? They're following me on YouTube or Twitter. And I say, oh, am I following you back? And I don't know. Let me just check. I have to switch my VPN on. The VPN's been switched off because they don't need it. That most of the time they get access to everything they want. Now, can they criticize the government? Yes, they can. And they do. If anybody wants to see criticism of the government, get an account and go look at Bilibili, Douyin, and all of these other websites, Weibo, all of these things, social medias, they're always criticizing the government. If I have a problem with the government, I just phone 12345. Any city that you're in, just phone that number. It'll get you through to the city's complaints and suggestions line. You got a complaint? Phone 12345.
I mean, this distinction. There's a distinction that many in the West, including people on the left, and I've talked to you about some of them, who don't they don't understand the importance of the distinction between criticizing the government, which you're allowed to do in China, just as you are in the United States, and calling for the overthrow of the government or collaborating with secessionists or people who want to overthrow the government, which is not okay. So people make a big deal out of the way this. I forget the name of the
line is drawn in a different place. We have basically the same line, but it's drawn in a different place. In China, you can't talk about it. In America, you can talk about it, but if you start agitating for it, then that's a different story. You cross that line.
Right.
And there's the difference. China, I'm not Chinese, but China, they just say, don't mention it. If you mention it, you're off. And you'll get whatever your comment blocked. And you might even, as some people I know, you might even get blocked from making further comments for a period of time. And then you have to arrange to get that block taken away. So it depends on, there are things that you can say and there are things that you can do, but you cannot agitate for change. You can't try and regime change. You can't secede. You can't express terrorism tendencies. The things that you aren't allowed to do. The only difference is your line is up there and our line is down there. That's the difference.
And the reason for that is that China is not trying to overthrow the government of the United States, nor is anyone else. The U.S. wants to overthrow the Chinese government. So
that's also true.
It's going to be different.
Let's take it one step further and talk about the banning of YouTube. I'm on YouTube now. The banning of YouTube, the banning of Twitter, the banning of Facebook, the banning of they're not banned. Facebook was banned because back in 2013 or 2008, there were riots in Xinjiang that were organized from Washington on Facebook, and communication was being made with people in Xinjiang to organize these things. Now, the Chinese police know about that. And when it was all over and all the dust had settled down and 200 people were dead from local actions by local terrorists on local people. Some of them were police officers. One of them was the leader of the Muslim community in Kashgar. These people are now dead because of this incident that happened. It was organized on Facebook. The Chinese government went to Facebook and said, we want the data from this. And Facebook said, we're not giving you that. Well, under the rules, you're supposed to store that data in China and give it to us. Well, you've broken the rules. So now the rules are, if you want to operate in China as an IT company, you store your data in China, and that data must be made available when requested by the authorities. Requested for the right reasons, that they do everything legally here. So then LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, all of these said, no, we're not going to do that. Now there's another factor as well. They could do all of that, and some organizations do. I'm on StreamYard. I don't need a VPN for StreamYard because it gets stored here in China. Now, the people that do this, do you know why YouTube is free? Do you know why Facebook is free? Do you know why Twitter is free? The reason it's free is because they're harvesting, manipulating, and selling your data.
Right.
So this is why I'm getting all kinds of adverts. I'm a researcher and I look up all kinds of strange things, and I'm getting adverts for everything that I look up because they're manipulating my data and sending it to my email feed. So when I open my email, there's an advert for something that I was looking at yesterday or looking at this morning, and it may be something I'm really not interested in, but I was researching it for an article. And it's quite often the case I get things that I'm really not interested in because I've researched it. They're manipulating and selling my data. They're not allowed to do that in China. In China, your data is protected. No one can manipulate or sell your data. So YouTube can come to China, but they can't make money. Google can come to China, but they can't make money. The real money that they make is from manipulating your data and selling it. So, wow. Once you start realizing this, you say, well, these are not blocks. These are not bans. These are companies that refuse to abide by the laws of the country they want to operate in. So if they don't abide by the country, and they're not going to pay any tax either, they're going to operate here completely free, selling all this stuff, operating out of Ireland or Alaska or Iceland and doing what they do and paying no tax, no contribution to China, except a negative contribution in terms of society, which is really, if you think about it, Facebook, YouTube, they're really negative contributions to society. There's some positive aspects of all of them, but they're really a negative overall contribution to society. And that's what China doesn't want.
Yeah. And they make a pretense of, moderating content for the greater good, but, they have computer algorithms do all that. And for instance, I did some videos on election rigging in the United States, and it was all fact-based. I talked about how various voter suppression tactics that Republicans used and that Democrats used in the primaries and so forth. And my video got taken down by YouTube for promoting election misinformation, supposedly.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you've been censored. I just want to make a point. I've got a comment here that says, Jerry, let your guests speak, because I'm talking a lot. What at the very beginning we explained this. There's been a technical issue. I am actually your guest, but we're on my channel, right?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, we're having a discussion, but we're talking about China, which you know more about than I do. So naturally, you're going to do most of the talking. But yeah.
So Vinny, I do apologize if I'm talking too much on my own channel. It's because I'm being interviewed in theory on my own channel. But sorry, Jeff. You've been censored. You've been one of the censored. I've been censored in China too. I made a comment. I made a video about the Confucius Institutes about a year ago or 6 months ago, and I put it up on one of the Chinese platforms, and it got taken down straight away because I said in it that the Confucius Institutes just simply don't talk about Tiananmen Square because it's not something they want as part of the history. It's not that they're trying to erase it. I mean, would you, if the Peace Corps, for example, came to China and started to teach in China, would they talk about the Kent State Massacre? Would they talk about the riots in New York? They wouldn't. And it's not really a case of China's trying to erase history. It's really a case of it's not a very good part of history to discuss. and it doesn't need to be discussed. What needs to happen is we need to move on and learn from it. I actually think China should build a memorial and get it over with. Put all the names of all the people who died and build a memorial, and every year light a candle there. That's what I think they should do.
Yeah. So just, to elaborate on one specific issue that relates to what we've been talking about, the one that's gotten the most publicity over the last few years is the alleged genocide or cultural genocide or whatever, forced labor, etc. Those allegations against the Chinese government regarding the Xinjiang autonomous region and the Uyghur population, you and I both know that there's an awful lot of propaganda involved here, but maybe I'll just let you talk about your take on it, since you've actually been there a number of times.
All right. Thanks, Vinny. No problem. So Vinny says, my bad. It's no problem at all. Xinjiang. Pretty much everything you read about Xinjiang is wrong. Pretty much. I've done a lot of writing. I've done some videos. I've discussed Xinjiang many times. But effectively, there are problems in Xinjiang. I mean, let's not be naive and suggest there are no problems. There are problems in Xinjiang. It's an area with a very, very high security factor. When you travel from one place to another, you travel through security checkpoints. When you get on a bus, you're going through metal detectors to get on a bus, metal detectors to walk into a McDonald's or any restaurant or shopping center. Yeah, well, there are very good reasons for it. And as I mentioned, in one riot back in, I think it was 2009, there was definitely big riots in 2013. There are actually several of them, and one of them had 200 people die. I was in a town called Shanshan in 2014, and it was the first place I had personally experienced that degree of security. Back in 2014, the security wasn't that high. It was there, but it wasn't as palpable as it is now. And I was in this city, and I sent a message to a friend of mine who's on WeChat and lives in Australia. And I said, I don't know what's going on in this city. Massive amounts of security. Every corner has 3 policemen on it. And, drive through the city, or ride as we were riding bicycles through the city. Basically every 300 meters, there's another police station. These are small stations, but they could accommodate 20 people quite comfortably. And we actually went into one of these police stations, and it's entirely self-contained. It has canteen, it has bedding, these guys live and work and breathe inside their police station. And so we got into a hotel, and I sent a message to my friend in Australia. He went on Google and looked it up. He said, this time last year, it was exactly this date last year, 2013, 30 people were killed, and 16 of them were policemen. And that was why it was the anniversary of that event. And the American media said it was because the government said, if you are a Muslim, you must shave your beard. It turned out not to be the case. Shaving the beard was an aspect, but shaving the beard was not about being a Muslim. It was about facial recognition. At the time was less developed, and they were installing facial recognition. So they said, we don't want people with beards. And the other thing was the hijab and things like that. But Xinjiang people do not have hijabs. They don't cover their face. They wear a scarf over their head, a little bit like the Malays do. It's a different system, but they wear a scarf, cover their hair, and not all of them cover their hair. It's actually a really interesting region because they're very, very beautiful people. There's amazing. The guys are really handsome, rugged guys, and the women are very beautiful. It's a really amazing place. The food is fantastic, and pretty much everything that you've read about it is a lie. That's pretty much all I can say. It is very secure. There are prisons there, but there are 25 million people there. Show me a place that has 25 million people and no prisons. I'll show you utopia. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so there are big problems, but those problems are resolved in terms of the terrorism, and a lot of Americans don't know this. This is a fact. Xinjiang shares a border with your favorite country, Afghanistan.
Right.
It's a small border, but it shares a border with Afghanistan. And Uyghurs
Pakistan
were
too, right?
crossing that. Sorry?
Also Pakistan?
Xinjiang doesn't share with Pakistan. It's on
Oh,
the
okay.
other side. It shares with, I think, 7 or 8 different countries, but it's a very big region. On the north, it's Mongolia and Russia and Kazakhstan. Not Russia, Mongolia and Kazakhstan, and then you've got other countries, the Stan countries, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, places like that, but not Pakistan. That's further over. But it does share a border with Afghanistan, and I think it's only 16 kilometers, 12 miles, something like that. It's not a very big border, but Uyghurs were crossing backwards and forwards with weaponry, getting trained. Who was training Uyghurs in Afghanistan? Now, that's a really interesting question. They were being trained in what, and for what reason, and why? Now, there are a couple of little factors that people don't know about Xinjiang, particularly people in America. One is that it is bordering Afghanistan. That's a fact. The other is that it holds probably the largest gas and oil reserves in the world that are untapped, unexplored oil and gas reserves. The third one is that it is the only major route and the fastest route. It's not the only route out of China by land, but it's the fastest route from China into Russia, Kazakhstan, and Europe, or Kazakhstan, Russia, and Europe. So those 3 factors make it very geopolitically important, very important geopolitically. It's less so now that Afghanistan is not the American issue that it once was, but it's very much so in terms of its oil and gas. America would love it to be an independent country. America would spend billions to be an independent country, and then they would pillage hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars worth of gas and oil from that region. There's also other things going on up there as well. It was the original nuclear testing site for China, a place called Lop Nor, and it has a rocket launching station up there as well. It has a lot of defense facilities, which are quite well hidden in the desert. And I think America is just a bit upset now because it doesn't have any chance of controlling the oil or the gas or the Belt and Road train route and road route out of China to Europe, because trains are leaving the east coast of China at the rate of 2 a day to go into Europe. And this is 19 days to go from the east coast of China to the west coast of Europe by train. So 500 containers a day are leaving Guangdong and Zhejiang and places like that and heading across to Europe. So there's a lot of reasons to want to destabilize that if you wanted to destabilize a large region. That's why it's there.
And just to kind of summarize for anyone watching or who will watch later who isn't aware of the details of how this all started and how the propaganda claims about Xinjiang started. The U.S., principally the U.S., there might be other actors involved, trained and organized a separatist movement, the East Timor independence movement, and there might be other organizations too.
East Timor's Indonesia. This is East Turkestan.
East Turkestan. I'm sorry, East Turkestan. My bad. Yeah.
But there was a problem with East Timor. The Australians are involved in that.
Yeah, East Turkestan independence movement. I'm sorry, because they want to make Xinjiang into so-called East Turkestan. And these are people, similar to ISIS. In fact, actually, ISIS or Al Qaeda fighters have been involved in, Uyghur, fundamentalist separatists. And let's be very clear: these are Muslims, but they are, a totally different variety of Muslims from the vast majority of Muslims who are peaceful. These are terrorists and religious fundamentalists who want everyone to bow down to their form of religion, and they trained by the U.S. Came into China, and I think it was the early 2000s when this started, or was it earlier than that?
My understanding, there are at least 5,000 trained Uyghur fighters in Syria right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is because I read it in Western media. So I take everything with a grain of salt. But I do know for a fact, that a lot of Uyghurs left Xinjiang with passports from Turkey. When they got to Turkey, the passports were taken away from them. Now they're stuck in Turkey. Now, those who can escape are ending up in places like Washington and Germany. We've got the World Uyghur Congress, which is based in Germany, and we've got the other Uyghur group. And the East Turkestan is not a country, never has been a country. It's a name given because people wanted to separate from China. That's the only thing. It's a geopolitical chess piece that is not real. People say, I want freedom for my country, East Turkestan. Well, where is that? It doesn't exist. Now, on the other hand, as somebody just mentioned here, East Timor, there were some serious massacres down there. The Portuguese handed East Timor back to the Indonesians. The Timorese wanted their independence. The Australians were involved. Terrible trouble. East Turkestan.
Hundreds of thousands of people massacred in East Timor back in the
it's a different situation. There's been no military massacres in Xinjiang, and there's been no military takeover of it, but it's a very secure area, and it's been part of China since Jesus was a kid. So we're not. No one from America can come and say historically it's not yours. You've got 250, 60 years of history. Historically, that's a lot less yours than Xinjiang is Chinese. And there's a lot of people know more about the history than I know about it. But the fact is, the language is alive. They all speak it. The culture is alive, very much alive. The religion is very much alive. And it's even more so in Gansu and Ningxia. There are mosques on every street corner. I mean, there is freedom of religion in China that is completely unbelieved by American people. Even British people contact me and say, that's not true. Well, I've got a video of churches and mosques. I've seen thousands of them just from my house. Within a 3-minute walk of my house, there are 2 churches. 5 minutes, there is another one. I've got a glass of wine. Cheers.
Oh, cool.
It's
too early for that here. But it's I mean, people say, oh, they're repressing the culture. They're not true at all. You mentioned the religious angle. That another thing people have pointed out is that all the street signs in Xinjiang are in the Uyghur language as well as in Uyghur language as well as in Mandarin. You don't see that here, like in Spanish-speaking neighborhoods. You typically don't see street signs in Spanish.
Well, I can go one step further, Jeff. Let me go one step further, because when we started this, most people. Cheers, Quantum Alchemist. I've got my followers saying cheers. So cheers. Most people don't realize this. In China, there are 56 ethnic groups. One of them is Han and 55 others. Han is 90+% of the people of China. But where an ethnic group exists in any numbers, they are given autonomy within their region. So there are ethnic autonomies all over. So Xinjiang is the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It's not a province. Technically, it has the kind of establishment of a province, but it must be headed up by a minority person. Doesn't necessarily have to be a Uyghur minority, but it's not going to be a Han minority who heads up that region. Now, when you get into different areas of Xinjiang, and this is the really fascinating part, there are some areas of Mongolian. And so the writing is Mandarin and Mongolian. And then other parts are more Tibetan. So the writing is Mongolian, is Mandarin and Tibetan. Then there's another part which is Tajik, and another part which is Kyrgyz. Can't even say that word. I've got the wrong shaped tongue to say it. Kyrgyzstan people. Another part is Kazakhs. These are ethnic minorities who have the majority in that particular county. So inside of Xinjiang Autonomous Region, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, there are ethnically counties that are autonomous counties for another ethnic minority in that region.
I didn't know that.
All over China, we've got these. There's, I don't know. Yeah, there are ethnic minority regions in Guangdong. In Qingyuan, we have some ethnic minority regions. There's another group of people who are not ethnic minority regions. They're known as Hakka. They're migrants who came here to Guangdong many years ago. They are Chinese Han, and they're not, but they have their own culture and they have their own buildings. They don't have their own language, or they do have their own language, but I don't think it's a written language. And it's really fascinating. Everything I read in Western media, that's not right. There's another, and that's how I got into politics. We go right the way back to the beginning, an hour and a half ago, when you said, "How did you get into this?" It was because I would answer a question from someone who said, "What about this?" Well, that's not true, and that's how it all started. My life has completely changed because of that.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm going to put the. I mean, you can keep talking, but I'm going to put the phone down for a second because my glasses are getting all.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you want me to keep talking about?
Doing this from my phone because I've got technical issues going on with my computer. But anyway, hold on. Just. I mean, you can keep talking.
Well, yeah. To explain. Let me explain the technical problems. We've both tried yesterday to get online, and we found that at one stage, one of us had a microphone and no video. Another stage, the other one had a video and no microphone. And then one stage, we had both of us on video and neither of us on microphone. So God knows why this all happened, but hey, we're all sorted now. But we had to use my StreamYard, not your StreamYard. So
yeah. Technical issues. One other thing I wanted to touch on was, and we've talked about it a little bit, but just this notion that a lot of Western leftists have that China has a lot of foreign investment from Western capitalist corporations. There is private there are private businesses in China. Some of them are pretty big, Huawei and so forth. So the claim is that therefore, quote unquote, China is capitalist. And so I asked the question in the title of an article I wrote recently, is China capitalist? And
I saw that. Yeah.
I went down the list of different things that the Chinese government has done over the last few years. And it was like, look, would a country governed by, where the ruling class is, the bourgeoisie, so to speak, the capitalists, would a country where that was the case, where not only did the country have capitalism for part of its economy, but the capitalists were in charge of the government, would such a country do any of these things? So
it's a really interesting dichotomy. China is a dichotomy. It is not fitted. It doesn't fit into any of the specific isms. Now, you mentioned Huawei. Do you know how many owners Huawei has?
I don't.
People talk about Mr. Zhang, the owner of Huawei, and it was his daughter, Meng, who was kidnapped by Canada, arrested by Canada. I don't know. I'm perhaps being a bit harsh with the word kidnapped, but certainly it was okay. But he owns 1.5% of the company that he built.
Well,
87,000 employees own the rest. That doesn't mean he's not rich. He's quite rich because it's a very big company, and the company is shared between 87,000. That was the last time I looked. It might be 97 or 107. I don't know. But last time I looked a couple of years ago, 87,000 people owned shares, and they were all employees of Huawei. So it's actually not a bad company to work for. And that's probably why it's so successful and why people work so hard. They have this thing that people call exploitation. They have this 996, work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And the fact is that is exploitative. But the other fact is they're making a lot of money doing it, and it's some of these people are quite happy doing it because
Yeah.
it reflects in what they don't get paid by the hour; they get paid by results, and it's reflecting. It's there's a lot of capitalist aspects about China. It's impossible to say China is not capitalist. There's a hell of a lot of socialist aspects about China. It's impossible to say that China is not socialist. And honestly, I'm not a political scientist. I've never read Marx. I've never really until 3 years ago. This is why I say I'm not interested in politics. I'm interested in the truth about China. I'm very interested
Right.
in psychology, and by psychology I don't mean behavior. I mean workplace psychology, the
Yeah.
differences, the dimensions of culture, cultural psychology.
Hmm.
I'm very interested in that, and it's something that I developed a really strong interest, a passion for almost when I studied about 7 or 8 years ago. I got a master's degree in it. And it was really interesting for me to do that. But when I did start doing that, I started seeing a different China. And I can't say it's not Marxism or socialism with Chinese characteristics. It's China with some socialist characteristics, and it's China with some capitalist characteristics, and it's China with some authoritarian characteristics for sure, but then it's China with some very liberal characteristics.
Yeah.
The whole country is a dichotomy. I can ride my bike around here, go up one-way streets, stop, have a beer in the street, and stuff like that. There's the liberalism, the freedoms. And then I can't go on YouTube because I haven't got my VPN working. And there's the authoritarianism or the control. So it's got both. It's got lots of personal freedoms and it's got lots of personal restrictions. It's got lots of capitalist ways of doing things because people want to get rich. I go out now, if I would, not now because it's midnight, but if I were to go out tomorrow and just film the cars in the street outside, I just live in an ordinary street. I guarantee you within 5 minutes, we will have had a Porsche, several Mercedes-Benz, more BMWs than I can probably count, and no car will be over 5 years old. That's my street. And it's just a normal street. Everywhere is the same. I could go to the Sheraton Hotel down the road and I'll see a Bentley, a Rolls Royce, a Maserati, Lamborghini, a couple of Porsches, several BMWs. You can't park in there unless you got one of those cars. That's Zhongshan. That's just China. That's the way it is. So capitalist, yes. Socialist, yes. The healthcare, the health system is very cheap. Getting Medicare, medical system, you have to pay for it, but it's really cheap. The way that they have helped workers, exploitation, people call it, and I read one of your responses to an article which talked about how China has exploited the workers over the years. Well, to a point, yes, but you have to remember that those workers started in poverty 40 years ago, and now their children are enjoying the fruits of that labor and looking after their parents. So it was really a case of a transit through from an agrarian society into a capitalist society, but with socialist tendencies. And it has some liberal policies and some authoritarian policies, and they're all China. That's what China is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you made a very important point about, about private corporations, that there's a distinction, which a lot of people don't make, between private corporations where like there's one or a few people who own the vast majority of the company and control the show, and the managers order the workers around. But then there's private companies where they're basically worker owned, like you talked about with Huawei. That's a very big distinction, and there's a tendency among Western leftists to lump all of the private corporations operating in China into the
as capitalists,
into the authoritarian capitalist category.
I got an approach on Twitter a few months ago, and I'm sure they won't mind me talking about this. We've had lots of discussions in the past. I got an approach from a company in England saying, we'd like to ask you if you'd be willing to promote some tweets for a fee. And I said, no, I don't do that. I don't work like that. And they said, but we followed you and it's about charity. And I said, well, if it's about charity, let me know what they are. And if it's a charity I approve of, I'll promote them anyway. That's what I do. My wife and I are heavily involved, not heavily. We were actively involved in charity before, but not so much now. But anyway, I'm actively promoting different kinds of charities for some people, but not on Twitter. And anyway, they said, the client has asked us not to disclose who they are at this stage, but would you be interested in doing some collaboration with them? And I said, it depends what they're doing, but if it's charity, I don't want to be paid for it. That's my bottom line. Yeah. Okay. So then about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got another Twitter message saying, I've been advised that I can disclose the nature of the client, and it's an IT industry. But they're going to be promoting a very large charitable event very soon. Would you be interested in working with them and perhaps writing an article about what they do? And I said, I'd be very interested in writing an article about what they do, but I don't know who they are or what they've done. They said, leave that with us. We'll come back to you. We just needed know if that was the case. It turns out it's Tencent. Tencent is the biggest company in China, I think. Maybe Huawei is bigger, I'm not sure. But it's certainly one of the biggest companies in China. And Tencent has a day every year on the 9th of September. And they wanted me to write an article for that day, which was called the Giving Day, 99 Giving Day. So I wrote an article for them and I sent it to them, and they sent it off to various different publications to try and get it published. And it transpired that Tencent actually matched dollar for dollar donations that are made to the tune of half a billion RMB. Every year they give away half a billion RMB. Now that's just on one day. It's 3 or 4 days around that one day, the 9/9 Giving Day. They give away $500 million. RMB, sorry, not dollars, RMB. So that's about 100,000. It's about $80,000 maybe. My maths is terrible. Anyway, it's a lot of money. But over the course of the year, the other thing that I found out
80 million maybe?
Yes. No, $500 million. Yeah, $500 million. Yes. Thank you. Not enough zeros in my head. And a glass of wine. So they're giving away $500 million RMB, $80 million, something like that, every year on this 3-day event or 4-day event that they have called 99 Giving Day. It's not one day, but it's 9th of the 9th is the big day. And they also, I found, donate to all kinds of charities throughout the year. They're literally giving away a lot of their profit. So yes, they're capitalist. And people say, oh, they're only doing that because Xi Jinping makes them do it. I very much doubt that. I very much doubt anyone is forcing them to do it, because this is the nature of China. When a city becomes rich, it helps a poorer city. When a person becomes rich, they help poorer people. And I've seen this with my own eyes. Charity is very, very strong in China. Very strong. It's just not the same as in the West, where people do it publicly and get tax deductions for it. And people give away. Bill Gates has given away billions and billions, but he's not given away a cent. What he's done is he's given access to his shares and the dividends from those shares. And he doesn't give away money. He gives away assets, and then people derive income from those assets. That's how the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation works. 10 cents different. They just give away money. But everything has to have a purpose. They don't give away money. They don't just say, well, here's some money for a poor person. What does that poor person need in order to stop being poor? Poverty alleviation is incredible in this country. And it's done city to city. It's done town to town. Within a big city, if you've got a rich part and a poor part, the richer part's helping the poorer part. In the province, if you've got a big city that's rich and a city that's poor, the rich city is helping the poor. Inter-province, I've actually been into Guangxi with the Zhongshan Volunteer Youth Association to help build a school library, which is something that this rich city could do for that poor city quite easily. And we did. That's how it works.
Yeah. And it's, there's both, it's both a product of the culture of having a collectivist culture where people take care of each other, and also a product of the fact that the government is in fact not run by and for rich people. And I think that's the most important aspect of this. What ism do we call China is well, okay, you've got private capital, you've got government-run corporations, which the banking sector and energy and resources and so forth are overwhelmingly under control of the government, and they use that to make people's lives better. And I went through several examples of that in my article. The poverty alleviation program, and just the fact that China has grown so much economically as a result of not just capital coming in, but also planning by the government to
planning. It's 5-year, 10-year, 15-year planning.
To facilitate development, and as a result, 800 million of China's 1.4 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty over the last 4 decades. And the last 100 million or so, I think, were lifted out by a targeted poverty alleviation program instituted when Xi Jinping came in 2013. That required a lot of community organization, a lot of resources, and they just wiped out the extreme poverty that China had been in. And China now has a longer life expectancy than the United States, lower infant mortality rate, or about the same, but coming from being a country with a life expectancy of like 40 when the Chinese Revolution took place in 1949. It's just,
it's staggering.
Yeah. And then I talked about
someone just made the comment. It's Hang Tuo again. All the Xinjiang electric buses are donated by Guangzhou province. All of the electric buses in Xinjiang are donated by this province. And I do know that there is the Zhongshan, the city I'm in, has a connection with a couple of places in Xinjiang, and there's a football team that gets sponsored to come down here. So kids who play football in the Xinjiang desert are invited down to the Guangdong heat to play football here. And every year there's a bunch of kids coming across. This is all something that happens just in the background, and it's not really well publicized. And it's something that China's not very good at, because the Chinese culture is a humility and humble culture. They don't want to say, look what I did. Now, I've got a load of awards for charity work that we've done. But on the wall behind me, you see the fake guitars. You don't see the awards because my wife doesn't want to show them. People will think you're a bit too full of yourself if you put those awards up. I've got a gold medal from the provincial governor of Guangdong province, but I'm not allowed to show anyone because it's not the right thing to do. So China is like that. It's very, very humble society. Now, when they want to show you what they've achieved, look at our high speed, look at our bridges, look at our infrastructure. That's China pride. They're proud of what China has achieved, but it's not the same as look what the city has done. It's a different thing altogether. They keep those more personal things, and also there's a danger of if we say we helped this city in Guangxi, there's a danger that the city in Guangxi might be embarrassed by that. We didn't want you to tell anyone. It's our business, but it happens. It exists, and it's saving face all the time. Yeah, there's a massive amount of charity, and it's not really described as charity. You can't set up a charity in China. We've tried. You can't. What we do is we fundraise for a government department, which is set up as a charity. So government departments are the charities here. And people would say, oh, how would you do that? Believe me, I have checked every penny. In the past, Anne and I, my wife, we've raised several million RMB for charity. And we know where it's all gone. We know who's got the benefit from it. We know what's happening. We know where that money is. And we're very happy with that. And we can ask other people to help us because we have that confidence.
Sorry, we didn't raise money for government.
No. She's correcting me. We didn't raise the money for government departments. We raised it. we set up our own fund, and the money got donated into a government department to be dispersed. That's the best way to explain it to an American. Sorry. Yeah. We didn't raise money for the government. No, we didn't. We raised money for charity.
Yeah.
But in order to disperse that money, you really need to. We can't legally collect money for charity, because who's to say that we're the real people? So we could be pocketing that. So we do everything above board, and there are government departments. The Zhongshan Disabled Association, the Zhongshan Sporting Association for the Disabled, and we help them to achieve the things that they want to do. That's how it works.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Just to kind of summarize the main point that I was trying to make in that article I wrote, is China capitalist ? And basically, I pointed out, so there's the poverty alleviation program in China, and just a massive development. And China, some people say, oh, China is imperialist. Look at all the their activity and investment in Africa and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, they're doing the same thing in those other places that they did in China. They're investing so that those countries can grow and develop and do business with China, and win-win cooperation, they characterize it as. And I've seen lots of interviews with Africans, for example, or people from various other countries that China has built, whatever, schools, hospitals, high-speed rail, etc. And they agreed, that we're benefiting from this too. It's not just China that's benefiting. So whoever heard of imperialists that quote unquote exploit countries in order to benefit them, as well as
the way I would respond to that, to anyone who said that, is, how many Africans have you asked?
Exactly.
That's the bottom line. And Deborah Bodegum is a very, very high level economist, author, published book writer. She wrote a book about the myth of the debt trap, particularly with relation to Africa. And the big one, the one that everybody uses, is the Sri Lankan port, where China helped to build a port and then took it over. It took it over. China holds 10% of the debt of Sri Lanka, and Western banks hold 70%. Right. And other interests hold another 10% or something. The Chinese took over a port that wasn't going to get paid for, and leased it so that the country had some money to help pay off its other debts. So China is not taking over anybody's assets. It's a lease. It's not an ownership, and it's a paid for lease. They've also forgiven debts in Sri Lanka as well. They've forgiven billions of dollars of debts in Africa, as I think you mentioned in your 17 different countries, 4 point. And someone had the temerity to say, well, it's easy to forgive a debt when it's interest free. Did you just hear what you said? China has given interest-free loans to countries in Africa. Okay, so that's a good start. Now, because they can't afford to pay it, they're wiping the debt. Yeah, okay, so that's not easy because it's interest-free loan. Let's go back to it's an interest-free loan and say that's a good point, first of all. So now it's been, it's really... people who think about this debt trap have literally got no insight into what's really happening in the world. People who think about Taiwan going to be invaded have got no insight. People who think that the democracy has been lost in Hong Kong, they have no insight into what really is happening there. That's the problem. And it's not ignorance on the part of people. It's lack of information on the part of the media. They will not tell the truth. And when they do talk about it, they're talking about it in a negative way. So people can be forgiven. I do forgive a lot of people. They can be forgiven for believing that China is as evil as they think it is. But once they've been told that it's not, and demonstrated that it's not, and refused to read an article that proves that it's not, then I won't forgive them. They're just being ignorant or racist or supremacist in whatever way. And that's the thing about people when you talk to them. Anyone who's got a reasonable question and wants an answer about China, please feel free to ask. And if you don't like the answer, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you a lie. I'm going to tell you the truth.
Yeah, it's
17 African countries.
You've never been to China and hardly ever read anything except what you read in the New York Times or whatever.
Yeah.
You know more about what's going on in China than someone who actually lives there. Talk to people who live.
The problem, Jeff, is that I live in China, therefore I must be paid by the dreaded CCP to tell this story.
Oh yes, the CCP.
I'm paid to tell this story. I mean, I'm paid to sit here and drink wine and talk to you.
Yeah.
I think for every comment I get is Wu Mao is what they call it. Wu Mao is half an RMB. No, it's a simple case. We don't get paid for doing what we do. Nobody gets paid to be a promotion. Well, I guess there are people who are paid working in media, but we're not selected by the government as being spokespeople. How the hell would you choose who to pick? I came online, started talking about China, which I love the place. There's no question about that. I am biased. I am one-sided about China. I do see the country through kind of rose-colored glasses. There is a lot to be seen that is beneficial about China. It's not perfect by any means. There's a lot of complaints that I have, but those complaints are minor. And there's nothing, not even COVID restrictions, nothing that would make me say I would much rather live in the UK, which is the country I was born in. I don't want to do. So that tells you something about my view on China. And it really changed because I started until 3 or 4 years ago, I saw China in the same way as everyone else. Even living here, I didn't bother, didn't pay attention. Oh, it's an authoritarian state. No, it's not. It's not. But I wasn't thinking about it. I was just living my life. And once I started realizing how I live my life, and it was probably 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when I started studying for my master's degree, I suddenly realized there's a lot more to this country, because now I'm looking at it from a cultural psychology point of view. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more to this country than meets the eye. And now I'm talking about it and writing about it. And sometimes I get paid when I write an article and have it published. I get paid for that usually. But now the Twitter.
So you're not monetizing your YouTube channel that I can tell. I don't see any ads.
Not yet. No, it's not big enough yet. I've got less than 7,000 followers. I get 3,000 or 4,000 views a day, maybe 5,000. My best video so far has been 30,000 views. It's low income, very low income for a lot of hassle. So I'm going to wait a little while. And I have a couple of friends who do my editing on the videos for me, and they're very good and very patient. Deborah Broadingham is from Johns Hopkins University. She wrote the book about the China debt myth, or the myth of the debt trap. Uh-huh. When I do monetize it, it won't be for my own benefit. I've got a pension. I earn a little bit of money. I get by, okay. But it'll be for the editors, because they've done everything for free. Yeah, that's great. Because they think that one day I'll make them rich. They have more confidence than I do.
Well, maybe they think that one day the truth will get out there.
That's actually what it is. They talk to me about this. Jerry, you've got so many good ideas and people are not listening to you. We want to make people listen to you. I said, I'm not interested in doing videos. We'll help you. I couldn't be bothered with the editing. We'll do the editing. Oh, okay, if you're going to do the editing. So they give me ideas sometimes. And so, what about writing about this or that? But most of the time I just rattle off a script and there it is. It comes out. I mean, I write what I want usually. They give me ideas. They've never said we can't write that or we can't say that. They're pretty good about it. They'll just take. And I have been critical of China a couple of times.
Yeah. But they take it. And maybe we could talk some about the criticism. But I also wanted to just finish up the point I was making that so China is way ahead of everyone else in the world in terms of you mentioned electric vehicles. The high-speed rail is far and away the best and most extensive in the world. You've got a massive reforestation program going on where I think the forest cover has doubled in the last couple of decades, and leading producer and consumer of solar and wind energy, and on and on and on. And then you've got the massively successful effort to contain COVID, and you've got the certainly there's economic inequality, but the Chinese government recognizes it as a problem and is trying to do something about it, and has brought so many people's standard of living up by so much. And you look at all this and you think, well, how in the world? I mean, there's no way in hell that a government that was governing on behalf of rich people to help them make more money would be doing any of these things. That just wouldn't happen. And that's not to say that things won't change someday, and the capitalist class will acquire a lot of power in the Chinese government, but that's not the case right now. And the proof is in the pudding, in the policies that the government has been pursuing, and the tremendous support, accordingly, that the government has from the people of China.
I'm just laughing at a comment that just came in, but you're absolutely right. The government is doing the right things because they are the right things to do. The people appreciate that. We're going through a difficult time with the COVID right now, and it is a difficult time. There's no doubt about that. But apparently,
not compared to here. The difference between there and here is that people just ignore the problem here.
Yeah.
They pretend that there's no more pandemic. But if you look at, we're still losing 300 people a day dying of COVID in the United States every single day.
I'm speechless. I'm stunned by that.
Huh?
I'm speechless.
Yeah.
I mean, it is total mismanagement that has led to that. Or perhaps it wasn't total mismanagement. Maybe it was targeted management. Maybe this was a plan all along.
But I mean, there's no doubt that it's intentional. That it wasn't an accident that the CDC refuses to mention masks anymore. But it's definitely. I mean, they think they're doing the right thing for the rich people or corporations or whatever. But I mean, really, it's short-sighted, even in an economic sense.
Well, if you're talking about many thousands of people who are too sick to go to work, then that's going to cost you literally billions on you. I mean, in terms of purchasing parity, the PPP, China is already way ahead of America. In terms of personal wealth, a factory worker in China can do and buy more than a factory worker in America can. And a factory worker in America has probably got like $35 an hour or something. A factory worker here has got $7 or $8 RMB an hour, not bucks, $1 or $2 an hour. But that person is living in a dormitory with subsidized food and probably sending money back home to somewhere in Sichuan or Hunan or Guizhou or wherever they're sending money back to. It's being used and utilized for the rest of their life in infrastructure. Someone mentioned the point, poverty alleviation is not about charity. It's not. It's definitely not. It's about building a sustainable economy in a place that didn't have a sustainable economy. I was in a mountain region a few weeks ago in Qingyuan in northern Guangdong, and we went up to this mountain, and I said to my wife on the way up in this bus, have we been here before? It looks familiar. She said, I'm thinking the same thing. And it turned out we were there 13 years ago when it was absolutely beautiful, but poverty-stricken. Now, the area has got a car park, it's got a bus park, it's got shops, it's got hotels, it's got restaurants. It's still a rice farming area, but it is now using its cultural, ethnic diversity to attract tourism and bring people into this most beautiful area that you can possibly imagine, and then charge them money for the privilege of staying there overnight or eating in their restaurants. And now you don't just have a village that has an economy of a few $100s a year. You have a village that has an economy of a few $100s a day, and everyone in that village is now contributing to the country in the form of income tax. So yes, it's a long-term development, it's a long-term investment, but what's the government got from this? it's got taxes coming in years to come. For the rest of the country's history, the government will be recovering money. But they're not interested in a return on investment of 2.3 years, which I was when I was heading up acquisitions for my company. I want a return on investment, my price earnings index. I had to know all these numbers. But the bottom line was, if we didn't make that money back in 2.3 years, we weren't going to buy that company. China's just saying, it doesn't matter if it takes us 30, 40, or 50 years, because once we've spent the money, those people are better off. That's what it's all about. So they build a road up the mountain. That costs millions. They put a car park in there, another couple of million. They build a reception area so that you can have drinks and coffees, and even coffees on the top of this mountain. If you wanted a coffee, you could get a coffee. And then they go up the hill into the houses. And there's one place that they didn't want you to go, and that was because it was their temple and their burial area. And they said, we don't want tourists in there. So they locked it off. That's okay. Respect their culture. But it's a beautiful environment, the most pristine environment you can imagine. And these guys are lucky enough to live there, but until 2 or 3 years ago, lived there without a road to get in there. And they had to come up the hill on a dirt track on a motorbike to get in and out. Now, and we went up there in a minibus 12 years ago, and I can tell you, we were slithering and sliding up the mountain. It was horrible. Very, very dangerous. Very easy to fall off one side of the mountain. Now there's a 2-lane highway going straight up. It goes round, curves up the mountain. And they've done that. That cost will be absorbed by the country for the next 20 years. But ultimately, the people there will be tax-paying, contributing residents and making money, living a better lifestyle, but still living in the most beautiful area in the world for them, for me.
That's how you do development. We've been going on for a little over 2 hours now, and less the people who are still with us get. We
have 56 viewers, and my mate Steve Weaver has just come on. Hi, Steve. We've had over 50 viewers most of the evening, so it's been pretty good. So great. It is time. It's 10 past midnight now.
All right, have another.
Wife's gone to bed.
It's just less people think that we exclusively view China through rose-colored glasses. Maybe we can go through some of the criticisms that we each have and talk about those a little bit, and maybe we can wrap up then. Okay, I'll start. Well, China has the death penalty. I don't particularly like that.
Neither do I.
Yeah. Another issue is that although China has done a great job as far as developing renewable energy, even though they've got a long way to go to replace fossil fuel energy with that, they're way ahead of anybody else. But consumption of meat and other animal products has, of course, as China has grown, skyrocketed over the last few decades, and that creates a whole host of environmental problems, including contributions to climate change through deforestation, through methane emissions from cattle and other ruminants, and so forth. It's a huge problem, and I don't see the Chinese government or China in general really talking about that, other than the small, like vegan or animal rights or environmental community.
They talk about climate change as a very, very big picture, and they're doing massive things. But you're right, there's smaller things that could be done. I would agree with that.
Yeah, although I did see the other day an article in The Guardian where they were talking, there are efforts by the Chinese government to get people to reduce their meat consumption, principally because of the environmental problems that it creates. So there is an effort, but
there's a huge effort to reduce food consumption. Consumption, full stop. That's one thing. The other thing is that every farm that I've been on, and I've been in a few farms recently, every farm I've been in recently uses some form of artificial intelligence or technology now. So they are improving. The agricultural systems in China are really, really well developed now. You still see people dropping the rice in by hand, but it's a lot less so now than it used to be. When you see that, you stop to take a picture of it because it's quite rare. They're doing it all by machine now. But in the countryside, and I've traveled extensively through the countryside. I see this a lot in the countryside. You see a lot of cows, a lot of ruminants. They have a lot of pigs. They have a lot of sheep. But the sheep are mostly in the northwest, in those huge grasslands. There are massive amounts of small technical changes to agriculture going on all the time. They're using hydroponics much more. They're using glass houses instead of farms. They are capturing carbon in a big way. I don't know how they're capturing or what they're doing with methane, but I'll bet you anything you like they're working on it. And this is the thing that China, you'll see, they're growing rice in salt water. That's something they've done. They're desalinating, and they've found a use for the brine. I can't remember what it is, but this was the biggest problem with desalination was the byproduct was brine. And then the only way to reduce brine is to add fresh water to it. Oh, that doesn't work very well. So that was a big problem. But they've found uses for this. Now they've got this thermal salt thing, thermal molten salt power generation. I don't know if I don't know what that uses, but salt and brine are the same things, or maybe that's what they're using it for. But yeah, they're desalinating. They've found ways to grow rice in salt water, slightly salty water. They've got better crops of rice. They've got 3 crops a year, and each crop is bigger than they used to be. So in terms of what they're doing agriculturally, there's a lot of things going on that we just don't get to hear about it. And they have massive agricultural schools working with farmers side by side. So if you go to agricultural school, you're not sitting in a classroom most of the time. You're out in the farm working on, and they've got completely, totally autonomous farms in Guangdong now. A farm that it grows, it plants, grows, harvests, reaps, prepares, and packages, and nobody touches the rice. That exists in China now, in Guangdong. That's what they're doing. So, there's a lot of issues, but they do work on them.
Yeah, for sure.
And this may be why I see them with rose-colored glasses, because every time someone tells me about a problem, I've already researched something, or I've been there and seen how they're trying to fix it.
Yeah. One that I haven't heard much about exactly what they have been doing other than dealing with the immediate problem was, although there's all sorts of wild speculation in the West about, the pandemic originating as a result of a lab leak, there's no evidence for that. And on the other hand, there's overwhelming evidence that, it started in an animal market, just like SARS did in your neck of the woods back in 2002. What I gather from what I've read about, what happened in Hunan and other markets, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, in Wuhan, is there was not good enforcement of regulations that existed that were on the books that said that certain animals could not be sold in that or in any market in China, but they were being sold, and that's the likely origin of the COVID outbreaks that took place in Wuhan.
Okay, well, there's also overwhelming evidence that Wuhan was in other countries before it was discovered in China. So, I mean, the fact that it does appear to have come from a marketplace in Wuhan is still in dispute, but I'm not going to argue with anyone about that. Certainly, Wuhan was the epicenter of the start of COVID. We know that for a fact. So let's say it did come out. Now, there's 2 things about that. One is you're absolutely right. The illegal trade in animals does exist, and it isn't or wasn't very well policed. You can bet your bottom dollar it is now. That's one thing. It wasn't very well policed. But what does that tell you about this authoritarian state in which we live? If it's possible for so many people to break the laws, there goes your authoritarian state argument. So you can have one, but you can't have the other. And that's a fact. This is what I mean about personal liberties. I can break the law every single day of my life, and nobody will care because it's not an important law. But when it comes to this, now it's an important law. So the sale of dogs as a food has been banned throughout China, but there is still a place in Guangxi called Yulin where there is a dog market every year. The police go there to try and stop it, and they move it to another place. People still want to buy their dogs. So yeah, there's all sorts of issues with that. But it's 1.5 billion people are being policed by a group of people. I don't know the size of the police force, but it's obviously not big enough to handle all of those issues. Right. They were selling things like pangolins. Pangolin is a wild animal. And they sell things like, they used to sell things like ivory. It's quite easy to get them, but they've stopped all that now. So yes, they were slow to develop these laws, and that's the problem. They were slow to develop the laws. And in this case, in the case of the wild animal markets, now you can't buy a live chicken in the market anymore. You can still buy live fish, but you cannot buy a live chicken. The chicken all have to be slaughtered before they go to the market. Now, people in China don't like that. They want to buy their food fresh. So they buy the chicken still alive, and that's it. And then the chicken is plucked and dressed for you, or undressed for you, while you wait for it. So that's an issue that's changed now. You cannot buy a live chicken in the market. Mm-hmm. So that's changed. You can't buy any live animal in the market now, except for fish. Seafood needs to be kept alive. Fish, seafood, shellfish, those things. But all of the meat products are now slaughtered before they get to the marketplace. And they've stepped up all of the checking on stuff like that big time. So yeah, it has changed. It's changed a lot.
Good to hear.
And it's changed for the better. But you're absolutely right with your criticism. It was very slow to change, and it's still not fully changed. It's not fully implemented. So there's an area where, I mean, the death penalty, I agree with you. I'm not in favor of the death penalty. I know that there are people who've been killed for the wrong reasons, and I know that's happened in China, although they won't publicize that. But for certain, it's happened where people have been locked up for life, and then they felt, this guy was innocent. It's a mistake. So it's obvious that there's been people killed who shouldn't have been killed, and I don't agree with proving that murder is wrong by murdering somebody. I'm not in favor of it. And they also still have the death penalty for financial crimes in China, which is something that I don't think many other countries do. But you have to rip off the government of more than a certain figure. I'm not sure what the figure is now, but they removed about 140 penalties from the list about 15 years ago. I remember reading this and thinking, this is great, but they've still left a lot of penalties. You can still be executed in China.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. I do disagree. You're right about the animal markets, but I'll tell you, it was fascinating to go to an animal market. It was fascinating. Whether you agree with it or like it, it was a fascinating experience. I couldn't take my vegetarian brother into a local market. I could now, but I couldn't have done a few years ago. It's a different market. The other thing I would criticize, the visa laws are not very good. They don't have a visa for someone like me, for example. I'm over 60 years old. I can't work legally. Banking system is crap. The number of signatures and pictures they have to take and photocopies of your passport. I'm just trying to change some money here. 3 photocopies of my passport, 2 pictures of me, sign here, sign here, sign here, press your ID code there. 40 minutes later, you get your money transferred. It's shockingly slow. They control the money very, very international money. It's okay if you just go into the bank and nobody has cash anymore. But I get paid a pension from the UK, and I give up my morning every time I go and cash in my pension.
No, you can't just deposit it electronically?
It's deposited electronically, but it's deposited in pound sterling. So then I have to go and physically go to the bank to have it transferred, and I have to wait 40 minutes, and then it takes 40 minutes. It's a 2-hour event to go and get my money.
Yeah, I'm so spoiled with banking here. I have most of my money's in an online bank, and I never have to go to a physical location unless I want cash. To either deposit money or withdraw it or whatever.
all of our money is on phones now. Everything we do is on telephones. We can pay for a taxi. We can order a taxi, pay for a taxi. We can order food, clothes, whatever you want to order. You order it online, pay for it online. It's delivered to your front door the next day. I just ordered some wine, and it's because it's heavy. It's coming from northern China, and it's taken 5 days. Hang says he doesn't like smoking. Is a big issue. I'm not a smoker, and smoking is still quite prevalent in restaurants and hotels and places like that here.
Something the U.S. is better on than China. That's a rarity.
But it is actually illegal, except there's no penalty. So you might see a sign saying smoking in this room is illegal. If you go check into a hotel, this is a non-smoking room. Smoking is illegal. There's a penalty of $5,000 if you're caught smoking. But here's an ashtray and box of matches for you. Go figure. No smoking, but here's your ashtray in case you need it.
Yeah,
you might need it for something else. I don't know. A lot of Chinese smoke. I'm looking to see if anything else comes up. Oh, back in 2014, The Guardian published a list of 100 UK lab leaks. So it's not exclusive to China if it was in China anyway. Well, listen, it's 25 past 12. We've been online for 2.5 hours. That's much longer than we expected. Are we going to do this again?
Oh, definitely. I'm sure there's plenty to talk about. So...
Yeah. Well, we can drink alcohol in the streets. That's another thing someone said, but I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a blessing. Sorry, go on.
We can stop recording and continue to chat for a couple of minutes here.
Okay. Well, before we stop recording, we now have 61 viewers, and I wanted to say thank you very much to all those viewers for hanging on with us. Someone says open a bank in Hong Kong. Great idea if I could get to Hong Kong. Because of COVID restrictions, I can get to Hong Kong, but I can't come back. Not for a while anyway. There's restrictions with the border crossing. Also, being in Hong Kong is very expensive to open a bank account. You can't just wander in and open a bank account. They want to have X amount of dollars in there. But anyway, North Korea, you can drink in the streets too. I didn't know that. All right. So thank you, everybody, and good night. We are going to wind it up here. Jeff, you want to say good night to anyone? I don't know if can you see the list of people who are in here? You might know some.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. And unfortunately, due to our technical issues, I wasn't able to get any of my audience to view this live, but hopefully in short order, Jerry will send me the link to the stream, and I can make it available to my listeners at the Bitter Pill. And I'm sure we've got plenty more we can talk about, as you've just seen. We can talk about this.
Let's do this again in a couple of weeks, and you can talk to your audience and see what questions didn't get answered.
Okay.
But that's a lot of talking by me there.
So I guess you got to get to bed now, but hopefully when you're up in the morning, you can send me the video, and I can. I
will do.
All right.
Okay.
First.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and good night. And this is the end of the broadcast in 3, 2, 1.
Good night and morning, everybody. Bye.
Still ending.
All right. Well,